So I am going to make that darker. I mean, it should be obvious, right, that we see white, that these are going to be the highest areas. So let's go ahead and let's do it this way. There we go. Yeah, I want these darker. Okay, let's try that. So this way, we've got it on an adjustment layer and it won't mess things up for us. I'm going to add a levels adjustment layer to the height map. Let's see if we can brighten that, sharpen that up. Okay, let's try saving that out again. So this is what I mean by having a workflow. Okay, so let's update that. So we need to go back to the image texture map area and then just place it. There we go. I kind of prefer something more like that. Okay. I'm not going to fuss with it too much again, just to go through the different steps. Now you'll notice we get this weird thing at the edge. I was getting that before, and I think it might have to do with this kind of white edge here. So let's try something. Not sure if this is going to work, but let's just shrink this down to see if we can get rid of that. Okay, we got rid of it. Seems like it. Let's try that. I actually don't think this is going to work, but it's not that big of a deal. Okay, same thing. Go back and replace that. Yeah, no, it's not doing. Okay, it's not that big of a deal because yet later on when we bake this thing, we can simply delete these. It's pretty easy to select and delete them. Okay, so now let's also go back to our modifiers, and we're going to add a subdivision surface. And we're going to add the subdivision before, so these things work in sequence, and so when you add a modifier, right, so this is the visibility for that, and this is the visibility for that. When you add them, right now it's doing the displacement first, and then it's subdividing it. So we actually want it to subdivide first. So with these arrows, I can just reorganize them. There we go. So now we're starting to get those kind of features from the actual mountain. Let's go ahead and bump that up again so you can kind of start to see the quality that we get. And if we want to smooth that out, if you're not happy with this kind of pixelated look, let's just go ahead and add another modifier, corrected smooth. We want that at the end, which it is. But why isn't it doing anything? Yeah, it's not doing anything. Let's bump this up. Okay, go only smooth. There we go. So now we're getting closer to what we want it to look like. Okay, so that's pretty clean. So now let's get our texture map on. So now we're going to go into materials. So yeah, you can see how this is one of the great benefits of Blender is being able to have these modifiers and add many of them, delete them, go through them. So it's a non-destructive way of working, similar to what I was showing in Photoshop. And so this is a really kind of advancement in terms of modeling stuff, being able to have this range of control and variation before committing to a form. So okay, so I'm gonna go now to material shader and creating that. But before doing that, I'm gonna go ahead and bake this out, and primarily only to. We don't need to do it to see the texture, but I just want to go over this step, a little bit of editing and deleting this this weird flange that's happening here, just so we can see it in a cleaner state, what the rendering would look like. So let's go ahead and do that. Do we need all of this? Yeah, let's go ahead. Okay, so the first thing is we don't want to, if you're going to do this, make sure to keep the original, because if I hit apply to all this, that's I can't go back. So the smart thing to do is you hit Shift D. That makes a copy of it. Now, as soon as you do that, it wants it to go somewhere. Just hit Escape. The copy, the duplicate is what's selected. Then hit M, and we're going to move it to another layer. So just move it over to the next one. Okay, and then down here, you'll see we just click on, this is that duplicate layer. And so once on the duplicate, we'll go ahead and apply all of these guys. There we go. Okay. Sometimes, depending on the image, you might get some, like what I got in the previous one that I made. I got a lot of weird spiky vertices that just kind of went flying down because of the abruptness of the color. And so I had to go into sculpt mode to clean that up, but this one seems pretty clean. There's none of that business going on. That's kind of what you want. But now I'm sure this thing has a lot of faces, so let's go into edit mode. I just hit tab, and I'm going to go on the edge selection, and I'm just going to click one of these edges right there, and then go to select similar amount of faces around an edge, and it'll select that whole bounded edge condition. And so all we need to do is increase this selection. So go back to select, more or less, more, control number pad plus. So I'm going to do that again, control number pad plus, and we're just going to do it until we get to where it's clean, which is I think 3 rows. I think that's right. And because we're working on a clean grid, we'll end up with a nice square still. So the grid is still pervasive here. We love grids. Okay, so now I can delete that. So hit X or delete and just go to faces. And there we go. And just to confirm that, let's hit 7 to go back to top view mode. And I'm still in ortho, so I can tell that this is pretty clean. Yes, very clean. Okay, nice. All right. So now let's get out of that. Now I'm gonna, let's see, do I want to do it here? I'm going to do it on the bottom. So I'm going to close this guy up and open another window or panel down here. I don't need that, and I'm going to switch this to node editor. Okay, don't need that either. Okay, so now we're going to assign a material. So let's go to this guy, which is the materials. We're going to click plus here. So this thing is a little weird. It took me a little while to understand it. But so this is, I'm adding a material slot. This is not the material itself just yet, but it's a material slot. And so because any surface or any object can have multiple materials, right? Because I can UV unwrap different portions of this differently. And so this is, I'm adding a material to the slot, but now I need to create the material. So make sure we're on object down here. And let's go to, because there's no materials in here yet, let's go to new. As soon as you do that, you'll get a default kind of material that shows up here. So we can go ahead and delete this guy. Let's go ahead and build this from scratch. So this is where it's kind of like procedural. I mean, many rendering engines are node-based, but this has some functionality that I haven't come across yet. So anyway, once we're in here, go Shift A, go to Shader, Principled BSDF, and then we're going to go to Texture, Shift A, go to Texture, and Image Texture. And then with this selected, hit Control T, just type Control T, and then it'll basically just automatically create the mapping and texture coordinate system for you. So this is where, this is where I'll access the image. This is where I can set the, how many times that image repeats, right? So if it's one scale, the image will fit the whole thing depending on the UV unmapping. I can rotate, I can do all this stuff, and this is basically telling me to use the UV information as the vector for the mapping. So those things, you can also find those here. Shift A, where is it? Vector mapping, is that it? Yeah. But so this is just a shortcut. So as soon as you throw an image in here, you just hit Control T, and boom, you get that. Okay, so first image we're going to open up is that diffuse. So let's go, and so this is nice, this little bookmark thing here. So I am going to, that's okay, I have one already. Photoshop, Mount Shasta, diffuse X, I think it was. Okay, there we go. So now that's on there. And so we're going to just start with that for now. Let's just go ahead and bump that there. I don't know why it's not even needing any of this, but okay. Am I in? Oh, I'm in texture mode, that's right. Okay, so yeah, this is important to know. So that node wrangler stuff that we had, right? So if I'm in, let's do this. Let me cut that. So if I go to material, I see nothing because this is not connected, right? But let me do this. Let's bring in another image texture. Oh, it's snapping around like that because I have the snap button on. I'm turning off that magnet to snap. Okay, so let's bring in another image just so we can see. Oh, so once you get to a location, if you hit plus, it'll create that as a bookmark. So I have this bookmark here. Okay, I'll just use the height image. I'll use the displace image. Okay, so I have two images here, right? So nothing, because nothing's connected here, I'm not getting any output of that. But if I go to texture mode, now what happens, whatever I have selected, it will show on that image, which is quite useful. So this only works if you're in texture mode and with the node wrangler setup. Also, what we did here is also a node wrangler thing. But that's quite useful. Okay, let's just go back there. Don't need this right now. So we're going to be building off of this later in terms of adding specular, metallic, normal maps, micro displacements, all this stuff. But for now, this is all we need in terms of assessing the quality of the image. Okay, so now to see this in terms of its, let's zoom in here. That's pretty detailed. It's pretty good resolution. And now we're just in material mode, so we're not even in render mode yet. So let's try that out. We don't have any lighting set up. So we go to environment, this little world icon here. This is the default lighting that's set up. We're going to use an HDRI as our lighting. But for now, let's just see what this looks like in render mode. You can see the default lighting is really washed out. It's not great. So we'll switch over to getting that HDRI soon. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about HDRIs. Let's go online. There's a great website, hdrihaven.com. Basically, you can get a lot of free HDRs. And so these are a very specific type of image and file that's called, it's based on equirectangular projection. So, it's image that is like the planet. Like how do you take a planet, a sphere, and flatten it, right? You get distortions. So that's why all these have this distorted quality, because they wrap back up into a sphere. And the one thing to know, it's important that HDRI images, it only works if they're an HDR file. Like it's a certain file type. So for example, sometimes let's go to a different one. Sometimes you might download stuff and it looks like an HDRI, but this is just a JPEG. So this won't work for what we need, because it doesn't have the information that's embedded in an HDR file. So an HDR file, once you upload it, it will actually recognize this as the light source. And so you actually get shadows from that light source. If it's not an HDR file, you won't get anything, right? So make sure that when you download, you're downloading the HDR file, or that you'll be using the HDR file. So it doesn't, for now, just maybe find some kind of urban environment, I guess. If you can find Atlanta, fantastic. I'm sure there's one out there somewhere. But these are free, and so you don't have to pay for these. Let's see, any decent urban ones? Yeah, let's try that one. Oh, Portland. Okay. Now it's free up to a certain size, I think. Well, let's see if we can download. The higher the better, obviously. 8K is pretty good. Let's see if it allows us to do that for free. Yes, it does. Great. Now I have a special little place where I keep all my HDRIs. All right. Okay, so let's go back to Blender. So in Blender, go to the environment, the world tab here. And down here in our node editor, we're going to click on the world. So this is basically this guy. So now we're just going to replace that. So Shift A, texture, environment texture, similar, Control T, and that'll set that up. So we can select that, delete that guy. Let's go ahead and open that file. Where, oh, do I have to unpack it? Oh no, it's still downloading. And, okay, there it is. Okay, plug that guy in there. Silly me, it's not an HDR file, it's an EXR, so we need HDR. Okay. Let's go back here. Let's see, just to make sure. Yep, these are all EXRs. Okay. Let's find an HDR city. It doesn't have to be a city. We just need this to get good, decent lighting. Here's one, Potsdamer Platz. Not great, sunny sky, but okay, great, HDR. So let's try that. I'm just gonna go with the 8K one for now. And while that's downloading, it's a little bit gray skies, which is not fantastic. So let's get something a little brighter. Let's try that. Flower Road, okay. So one of them finished downloading, okay. Let's replace that with the Portland one. Still nothing, what is going on? Ah, we're missing the background component, okay. Shift A, shader, background. And when I place this, if I just go right between that highlights, it'll just plug it in. And that should work. There we go. That's much better. Okay. Okay, so now we've got HDR right. And so we're not seeing it in the background because it's off. So if we want to visualize this thing, if I go into the scene, which is that camera icon, go down, where is it? Film, transparent. I unselect that. Oh, that's weird. Why isn't it showing up? Oh, we should be able to see it. Okay, some setting needs to be set with this thing. Oh yes, it's because we're in ortho mode. We can't see it. Okay, so it's showing up here, so we know it's working. We're getting decent lighting, so we know it's working. But in ortho mode, it's a perspective image, so it doesn't know how to do it. So let's just go to perspective, and then we see it. So now you can see the environment that is lighting that scene. But we don't really need to see that just yet, or even for now. So to hide that, we go back into our scene settings and go down to film transparent. There we go. Okay, great. So we've got that set up. So again, this one's not giving me strong shadows. That's why I didn't like that one. So let's try that other one. Which one was it? Was it that one? Or Flower Road? Let's try that. Yeah, that's good, because now we're getting shadows. That's what I want. Okay. Great. It's very strong. That's maybe a little too strong, but all right. Get the idea. And so we can rotate. If we don't like the direction, we basically rotate it through here. Rotate Z. Let's go 40 degrees. 90. So we'll see that shadow change. So that's how we control that. And again, if we want like more light to come up, we can also rotate it in X. But again, you're actually rotating the whole image. So ideally, if you want to be really accurate, you don't rotate this at all. You just rotate the Z. There you go. So you get the idea. Okay, great. So now let's one last thing we'll go over in this is now let's convert this to a solid mass, which would be the thing that we would start to kind of carve into, to Boolean, to put program and other things in. So let's do that now. Let's get out of rendered mode. Let's go back to solid. And I can close this up. I don't need that anymore. I don't need that. Okay, so what we're going to do is, since this is a nice, clean, gridded mesh, we are going to duplicate it and use it as the bottom of a kind of our mass. And then we're going to extrude these faces down and connect to them. So let's go ahead and Shift D, and then I'm going to hit Z to lock it into the Z axis and just move it down. And with it selected, let's go to Edit Mode, Tab. I'm going to select all of those. And then I'm going to scale these in Z, so I'm going to type S, and then Z, and then I'm going to type 0, enter, and it'll flatten it. Okay, let's get out of that mode. Now see how my gumball is up here? So if I wanted to put that down here, that's where I would say, we would do this, where is it? Cursor to select, no. Ah yes, origin to geometry, there you go. So that's the Control Shift Alt C, and then you'll get that. We want origin to geometry. I should place it at the center of it. And then Shift S, cursor to select it. There you go. Okay. It's a little bit of a pain, but it works. So then we set this to where we want it, and again we're in scale, so we have an idea about how big this is. So I'm just going to do it there for now. And so because it's all gridded and mesh, we know that everything aligns. So now let's go ahead and pick this guy. Go back to edit mode and make sure we're on the edge selection. And we'll do that same thing where we select one, select similar amount of faces around an edge. And we should be able to cleanly extrude it. So I'm going to extrude, type E, and that should start the extrude process. Now it'll go anywhere, hit Z to lock it to the Z axis. And just click out, and then we're going to do the same thing. We're going to scale Z with 0. Okay, and then now should be able to, okay, now we want to snap it to that guy. So with that still selected, let's turn back our snap. Let's go to closest, set this to closest with the snap on. And do that and go there, and there we go. So now we're good. So we would need to join these and to kind of merge all the vertices. But let's go ahead, I'm going to go back to ortho mode here. And then the texture map, the image should have projected down into stripes. Yeah, there we go. Okay, great. So now let's go back to this, and we're going to select that. Here, so I select both of them. Probably easier if I just selected them both through here. But now with those selected, we're going to go to join. But we need to go, let's tab, let's go to edit mode. Just select all. So while it joined it, it didn't merge the vertices down there. This is what we need to do. Oh, all. And then go down here, make sure you're in tools, and go remove doubles. So basically two vertices are on top of each other, it'll just get rid of one of them by merging them. Okay. And then select A, hit A to deselect, and then let's get out of that. There we go. So now this thing is ready for some Boolean action.